Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. The EIP Enable Conservation Tillage project has been running in Teagasc for the past 3 years and has highlighted the challenges associated with grass weeds in all establishment systems in Ireland. The challenges of herbicide resistance in Irish populations of grass weeds are becoming apparent on many farms, and the work completed by the project confirms there is both target and non-target herbicide resistance. The project is a network of focus farms which has held many KT events on these farms, which we think has helped farmers understand how best to manage these establishment systems. There have been a number of changes in staff in the project over the past few months, and today I'm delighted to be joined by John Mahon, who has recently joined the project as a project advisor. John, you're very welcome to the podcast. I'd like to get your perspective on the plough and non-plough based systems and grassweed problems, as you have seen it from a private industry point of view for the past number of years. But firstly, John, you might just give our listeners an idea of what activities you were up to in agriculture before you joined the ECT project.
I've been in the Irish tillage industry in agriculture for 31 years now, and many of your listeners may have come across me at various stages on different projects along the way. I spent 10 very informative years with Lambie Agribusiness in Atboy in Meath after leaving college, and then relocated to County Carlow. And I've been self-employed until my recent appointment there on the ECT project in Teagasc and Oak Park. During all of that time, I suppose I've primarily been involved in organic sludge land applications for the food and drinks industry. I was the sole distributor in Ireland for a UK crop management software called Gatekeeper. I would have worked closely with machinery manufacturers and adopting precision farming techniques and soil sampling companies developing grid and zone samplings for variable rate applications. And all of the time, I suppose I would have been submitting the Department of Agriculture scheme applications and doing nutrient management plans. But all of the time, crops have always been to the forefront in anything I've been doing. And I have always been an active agronomist on the ground. So I've been working both for individual clients and commercial companies. So I suppose I have a decent knowledge of the Irish tillage industry.
I'd say you're being very modest there in terms of saying decent. I think it's a very broad and varied experience you have, John, and very well rounded. So just in terms of your, you've been around Ireland quite a lot, and I know you've been dealing with people from all sides of the country. So you've, I suppose, been seeing a switch of systems maybe over the last number of years. Where do you think it's at, or, in terms of switching establishment systems from plough to non-plough based systems, or how do you view that?
Well, I suppose that I've studied it for quite a long time. I suppose the switch, you could say, has been described as very gradual, which in itself isn't a bad thing, because for me, it's a method that it must be learned. Your management practices have to change and improve, and you do need to be organized. I'll give you an example. Like back at the very start, it was predominantly min-till, but I remember a group of us travelled over to East Midlands in England in 2001 to see our first no-till drill. It was a Bertini Argentinian drill, which Tony Reynolds, who was one of the pioneers of conservation agriculture over there. And I mean, even back then, contemplating bringing a machine halfway around the world to sow in your fields was massive. Like, whereas nowadays, the developers, there's so many makes and models there, and they're well capable of doing such an excellent job in Irish conditions. And secondly, like most things in life, there was very little known about the methods, and truly those people were pioneers. But there was the usual wait and see approach from many people, and let someone else try it, and sure, if you failed, I could have told you so. But nowadays, it's massive. Every part of the country has someone successful using the non-plough based establishment. So it's no longer a case, and it's more a case of whether it's suitable or not for a particular farm. The one thing I would like to stress always is that non-plough based systems aren't for everyone or every situation. Like, for example, if it's not feasible to contemplate in, say, a winter wheat situation coming in after a veg crop or whatever, so it's not always suitable. But the one thing I have observed right through the years is very few people that I know who went this particular route have ever reverted back to ploughing. Now, and I'm not talking about ploughing, for wherever it was necessary for whatever reason on a particular year. They've stuck with the system. They've learned how to do it properly, and the one simple reason for sticking with the system is profit. They're improving their farm profitability. They're able to establish their crops cheaper. They're reducing the workload, and they have similar yield expectations. And the second part of it is that, like, soil fertility and reducing their carbon footprint have been ongoing as well. And these, in the coming decade, Michael, these are all going to be far more important.
Yeah, you often, John, I suppose here guys, I suppose primarily talking about that environmental part, but I'm often struck by the I suppose efficiency of work is often something that probably is the primary maybe motivation in some of these firms, with the other things coming in, maybe very close seconds, and certainly people have adapted reasonably well. So maybe when you're thinking about all the systems, and you've seen a lot up and down the country, are there an area or two that you think those farmers could potentially improve on when using these non-plough based systems?
The biggest observation I would have, Michael, would be that it's not just a case of just changing the drill and driving on. Like, it has to be a business decision on the farm. If you don't adapt that mindset at the start, then you're on the back foot before you even start. You need to know why you're switching and what you need to do to be successful at it. I'd say that's the first thing for anyone even contemplating it. When you change anything, like anything, you have to learn. And I'm always amazed, Michael, how adaptable the farmers are when a new tractor arrives in with all the bells and whistles and technology on board. Many an agronomist like me would be baffled with what's on tractors nowadays. But the same applies when you're adopting non-plough based systems. You have to learn. It's not a case that you'll know exactly what to do. The massive difference nowadays is that when guys were at it 20 years ago, it was very hard to get advice and good advice, and it was a real trial and error. There's plenty of good advice out there now. Just if people have an open mind, ask plenty of questions, try things out on a small scale, see what works best for you. If your soil type, your crop choice, local contracts, whatever. It has to fit your rotation and your budget. And many people I have started in conservation agriculture by just getting a neighbour's machine in, part of a field, try it, see what works, and you can take it from there if it's going to work out for you and be cost effective.
Okay, and when we come back then to maybe looking at some of the areas that potentially are becoming a little bit problematic, and in fairness, it's not just non-plough based systems, it's also on plough based systems, which is grass weeds, which are becoming more problematic. From your experience going around the countryside, which ones do you think are maybe still the most problematic, or are the new problems emerging out there?
Well, I suppose on the grass weeds side of things, wild oats obviously has been around for many years. It's not specifically associated with a non-plough based system. And ironically, continuous spring barley type scenarios have been the main culprit there, using one particular chemical active for successive years, and a lack of alternative chemistry because they weren't doing rotation. Bromes are there all the time, particularly in the likes of continuous winter barley, and it's creeping in from the headlands. Now, it must be said that non-plough based systems are giving the brome a better chance of survival and moving inwards in fields. But effective chemical control, like pre-emergent sprays in barley. But if you introduce your rotational break cropping and combine it with stale seedbed techniques or cover cropping, and the use of arable grass margins, there are solutions out there, Blackgrass, again, we all hear about blackgrass. It's becoming more prevalent. The only advice for it, I suppose, is to have a zero tolerance policy. If you see it, you have to destroy it before the seed becomes viable. It's such a prolific plant. You can't allow it to establish itself and build the seed bank in the field, particularly in a non-plough based system. You see the seed source and the machine hygiene, particularly on the balers, have a lot to do with the spread of it, in my opinion, in recent years. You have a few others, the likes of canary grass, spring germinators, but they're easily enough controlled with axial. Most of the problems I see with canary grass are people actually missed spraying it as opposed to it getting away on them, and they're just creating a seed bank for themselves. And then there are more reports of Italian ryegrass and new ones cropping up like rat's tail fescue and stuff as well. So there's always something new.
So you mentioned, John, there along the way, a bit about cultural control. Where do you think the farmers, or maybe even more widely the industry's understanding is in terms of cultural control? And I suppose all that being said, understanding is one thing, but action is another. Does the action on the ground match that understanding?
We talk about cultural control for one reason only, and that's to try and protect the chemistry that we have. I know people get tired of hearing it, but we really have to protect the chemistry we have, and we must be serious about getting the message out there. There's not an endless stream of new products coming, so we have to look after what we have. My understanding of it in terms of cultural control is I'd say the industry and farmers are aware of certain individual cultural control methods like rotation. Ironically, the three crop rule of crop diversification, which came in with the basic payment scheme, forced rotation onto some farms. And I'd say it was a saving grace in many places because there was herbicide resistance developing on both grass weeds and broadleaf weeds, which kind of was quelled after that point because alternative chemistry was introduced. The industry and farmers really need to have a collective approach on all of the methods and an integrated problem. They just the likes of a nutrient management plan is common on a farm. So if you integrated the same approach with cultural control methods, I don't think we should have a problem.
Okay. So when we kind of look at maybe some of the more common weeds, you mentioned already wild oats and sterile brome, of which are probably some of the biggest weeds out there. Where do you think, or what have you seen, I suppose, working in the private entities? Where's the biggest gains possible in terms of control of these weeds, do you think?
With wild oats, the chemistry has been axial-based programs up to now, and anything that takes the pressure off of that and prevents these ACK resistance from building up will surely benefit. From the ECT project itself in Oak Park, 25% of the samples submitted for testing were resistant. So it's a real and obvious threat that's out there. So stale seedbed technique is obvious, and the use of glyphosate pre-sowing. If you can introduce rotational break crops, oilseed rape or legumes, whatever else, you'll have alternative chemistry coming into the mix. Machine hygiene, nobody can emphasize enough how much a baler and combine can spread wild oats from field to field. One thing that's not that commonly talked about is wild oat is susceptible to competition at a very early growth stage. So having an adequate plant count by using appropriate seed rates and having them very well established, can be a very effective control measure as well. That's not talked about too much. With the brome, I suppose with sterile brome, you must use a combination of chemical and cultural control methods. It's important, as with all grass weeds, to identify them in time in May and June. If the particular patches are bad, bale them and remove the affected straw, and again, machine hygiene for the baler and combine on those areas comes into play. Stale seed beds and the use of glyphosate pre-sowing. But the appropriate pre-emergence or early post-emergence sprays are extremely important. And if it was in a winter wheat situation, a follow-up then in the springtime with the likes of Pacifica, but all the cultural control methods like crop rotation and stale seed beds and the use of cover crops are essential. Arable grass margins actually also with sterile brome are very effective.
There's two other ones, John, just as you're chatting there,
Mm-hmm.
kind of struck me as I was going along in terms of wild oats. There's often a case where people where it goes from cereals into a non-cereal crop can neglect to just go out and rogue them in the first place, or maybe even rogue them in the in a cereal crop. I think more people should be doing that, and obviously then for brome, the other probably easy one, I suppose, even on non-plough based systems, to reset the system is to use a plough. It works extremely well, and we all know it works extremely well. But look, that's just two other ones that kind of struck me as you were chatting there,
Yeah, the other thing which I think we should mention is herbicide rates are another reason why we have reduced control and resistance problems. So using robust rates at the recommended rates, it's just essential in my opinion.
I suppose, John, the really tricky one then, I suppose, is blackgrass. From your, going around the country over the last number of years, how much do you think that has increased over the last 5 years or so?
It's a hard one to answer, Michael. The one thing, I suppose, we have got better at detecting it, which helps, but I would also think that there has been a steady increase at the same time as well. I suppose more worrying for me is that within the ECT project, we're showing up a number of resistant populations in the glasshouse experiments. And these are from samples that have been submitted to Oak Park from the industry. So I'm worried about that, but I'm also worried about how many populations may be out there that we actually don't know about yet as well, So I would imagine it's increased a lot over the last 5 years and probably is on that upward trajectory.
You've probably, you may well have answered this question already, but you've been, you joined the project only recently, a couple of months ago, and you've managed to get your head into some of the areas that we've been working on in the project over that period of time. Are you more or less worried or concerned now in terms of, I suppose, the tillage systems that we use, the establishment systems that we use, and the grass weeds that were there, with the knowledge you have now in comparison to what you had before you started?
Good question, Michael. I would say, in fairness, I'm probably more concerned. Being a typical agronomist and I farm as well, we all read and we hear about resistance and we all take note and everything else, but I am seeing the work that the likes of EJ Vascar is doing in the glasshouse is when you see populations up close 2 weeks after being sprayed with commercial agrochemicals at standard commercial rates, and they're standing up tall and green as a leek. It's pretty scary, to be honest. And like the one thing Vijay has pointed out to me in his work is, the resistance he's finding is not uniform. Would say some of the bromes, in fairness, he's not finding that much resistance from the samples that have been sent in, whereas the wild oats, it seems to be all ACK resistance. Blackgrass, it's multiple resistance, every chemical type. But the one thing I have to say is that it's very encouraging to see the amount of samples which were submitted to Oak Park for testing over the course of the program to date. So there's an awareness of the possibility of herbicide resistance being out there, but it does also shows a willingness to do something about it, which has to be very useful,
I suppose maybe I think you got a first-hand knowledge, spending a bit of time in the glasshouse, about how intensive this work is and how difficult and time-soaking it is, I suppose.
Well, I'd just like to say on that point, I have a full appreciation now of how long it takes to get a sample result. Yeah, it is a very intensive process, taking 6 to 7 weeks per batch as well. So yeah, I have first-hand knowledge now and more of an appreciation.
Yeah. So coming back to resistance that you were talking about there, and you're a little bit more worried about that. How do you think that should play into how agronomists view weeds on the ground at the moment in terms of their recommendations to farmers?
Well, I suppose in twofold. One, it's up to us to make sure that the knowledge that we're gaining through the project is adequately transferred to all of the advisors and farmers out there. We must get the advice out there properly so they can be fully equipped with the knowledge they need to come up with the integrated control techniques that are required in order to give the correct advice. And that will protect our arsenal of chemistry and avoid the resistance problems.
So the agronomists, to a degree, I suppose, need to change and encourage farmers to, I suppose, be in a situation where the agronomist can, I suppose, recommend a various different herbicide types to help that resistance scenario not build up, I suppose, in the first place, and to try and control if it is turning second.
Absolutely, and it's just the other part is to say it's all doable. It's just to be subconsciously aware of that there are other alternatives to chemistry, and work those solutions into an overall system on the farm if you can.
So in terms of helping farmers out in terms of this project, you probably have in your mind a number of actions that you're going to try and undertake over the next number of months to try and get information across. You might maybe give us an idea about some of the things that you're going to try and do.
Primarily, I want to start and I need to follow up with all of the participants and advisors who have submitted all those samples for the resistance testing, and work with them and outline a plan of action depending on the results. And as you've pointed out, it's a slow and expensive process, and it'll be finalized by the summer, but it needs to be taken on board to deal with the resistant fields out there. The focus farm validation areas on the 10 focus farms need to be developed further with the best practice and enhanced practice techniques to come up with the proper cultural grassweed control measures. But the one thing I really want to focus on between now and the summer would be to continue grassweed identification workshops and the likes of training events to develop a suite of control measures with the different farmer groups and advisors that are out there.
And can people, John, contact you directly to try and set up some of those if there's a bunch of farmers or students or even agronomists, I suppose, who want to sit down with you and get some training or put some relevant samples in front of farmers to try and get everybody trained up to the same level?
Oh, absolutely, and no problem. Well, I can be contacted by email, john.mahon@teagasc.ie if you wanted to email me. And I think, Michael, just the most important thing, if I might say to finish, is if there's someone out there contemplating conservation agriculture techniques for the first time, not to be afraid to try a bit. There's plenty of good sources of help and plenty of good reasons why it might be the right choice for your farm right now. And for those of them who are up and running and probably may be experiencing odd problems, again, plenty of groups, organizations, lots of experience out there to help you get over teething problems. And if any of the problems are with grass weeds or whatever else, then I'm available, as are all of the Teagasc advisors and agronomists in the industry. We're there to help, and we'll develop a strategy suitable for the farm to move forward.
That's great, John. Thank you very much for your time, and certainly looking forward to working with you on the project over the next 2 years or so, and that you're going to be around, and hopefully we'll get all of the bits and pieces that we're after chatting about here to try and get a better understanding of the industry over the next little while. So again, thanks very much, John, for your time.
Thank you, Michael. So
that's it for the Tillage Edge, and my thanks to John for joining me today. If you've any suggestions about a topic you would like to hear more about, then drop me an email on michael.hennessy@teagasc.ie or on Twitter @teagascrops. We want to hear from farmers and other people in the industry about what interests them, so please do get in touch. There are a number of events coming up in the next few weeks, with the National Tillage Conference Part 1 on this Thursday, January the 13th, and the second part on Thursday, January the 27th. Around these conference days, there are also webinars dealing with topics such as fertiliser use, CAP, malt and barley, and other crop management issues. All of these events can be found at www.teagasc.ie/tillage month. Log on there to register for these events. Finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed this podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.